As the sun sets over the city, the neon signs begin to glow, marking another long day for our f***ing dumb protagonist named Jin Young. At 24 years old, he has become a master of the part-time hustle, spending his evenings scrubbing floors and brewing coffee at a local cafe until the very last light goes out. While his boss appreciates his tireless work ethic, Jin Young has a hidden reason for staying late, as he finds the silence of the empty shop far more welcoming than the atmosphere waiting for him at home. When he finally arrives at the large, modern mansion where he lives, he moves through the front door like a professional intruder, hoping to reach his room without being noticed. His luck fails him immediately when he finds the lady of the house, Mrs. Yu, waiting in the living room. She greets him with her usual cold and distant expression, complaining that his late arrival kept her awake. Though she speaks with a sharp edge, she casually mentions that there is food on the table if he is hungry. Jin Young assumes she is just offloading leftovers, but as he lifts the lid, he realizes the meal is surprisingly fresh and still warm. He eats in a state of quiet confusion, eventually scrubbing the dishes to make sure he leaves no trace of his existence behind. Hoping the worst of the night is over, Jin Young begins the treacherous journey up the stairs, but the hallway proves to be a literal stumbling block. He accidentally bumps into the eldest daughter, Sophie, who treats the minor collision as if she has just survived a high-speed car wreck. She uses her intimidating presence to demand $50 for her supposed medical expenses, leaving Jin Young to wonder how a simple shoulder brush could be so expensive. He reluctantly hands over the cash, feeling like he has just been mugged in his own hallway, while Sophie walks away with a mysterious smirk. The commotion draws out the youngest daughter, Sarah, who bursts from her room with enough temper to light up the entire block. She yells at them both for being too loud and threatens to provide them with microphones if they want to keep performing in the hallway. Exhausted and defeated, Jin Young finally retreats to the safety of his bedroom, convinced that he is the most hated person in the entire building. He pulls out his bank account book and stares at the depressing balance, realizing that at this rate, it will take forever to save up enough money to move out. He reflects on how his life changed 9 years ago when his parents passed away and the late Mr. Yu, a kind CEO who felt indebted to his father, took him in. Since the old man passed away from a lifetime of smoking, Jin Young has felt entirely alone, viewing his presence in the house as a burden to the three women. However, the reality behind the closed doors of the mansion is much different than what Jin Young perceives. In her room, Sophie carefully places the $50 into a secret box filled with photos of Jin Young, her face flushing with a mix of guilt and hidden affection. Nearby, Sarah sits alone on her bed, clutching her pillow in frustration because she once again lost her temper when she actually wanted to greet him kindly. Even Mrs. Yu stands in the kitchen, quietly smiling to herself because she managed to have a conversation with him and feels touched that he did the dishes without being asked. While Jin Young drifts off to sleep dreaming of an escape, he is completely unaware that he is living in a house full of people who actually adore him but are absolutely terrible at showing it. The sun shines brightly through the large windows as birds chirp outside, marking the start of a quiet Sunday morning. Sophie wakes up slowly and stretches in her bed, but her peace is immediately ruined by a persistent phone notification. It is a message from her boss asking about a work file on her day off, and she grumbles about the unfairness of being bothered on a weekend. She realizes that life would be much easier if she worked for her mother's company instead, where she could enjoy the perks of being the boss's daughter. Her stomach joins the protest with a loud growl, and she decides that finding a meal is more important than worrying about work emails. She wanders out of her room and calls for her mother, only to find the living room completely deserted. It seems even company presidents have to work on Sundays, leaving Sophie to fend for herself. A quick peek into Sarah's messy bedroom confirms that her sister is also gone, which leaves Sophie feeling strangely abandoned in the massive house. As she heads back toward the hallway, she notices that Jin Young has uncharacteristically left his bedroom door wide open. This is a rare opportunity since he usually keeps it locked, and her curiosity leads her straight inside. Sophie plops down on his bed and immediately spots his bank account book lying right there in the open. She cannot resist taking a look and is shocked to discover that he has managed to save up a small fortune. It seems impossible that a part-timer has more money in the bank than she does with her full-time career. She reflects on how he refuses any financial help and even pays his own share of the household expenses, which makes his massive savings even more mysterious. For a brief moment, she wonders if he is secretly saving up to buy her a spectacular surprise gift. She quickly dismisses the idea when she remembers that she usually treats him like her personal servant, making a sussy gesture seem like a total fantasy. Just then, Jin Young walks into the room and stops in his tracks, looking completely drained. He was sent home early from the cafe after a series of clumsy blunders, and the last thing he expected was to find a home intruder sitting on his bed. He tries to ask what she is doing there, but Sophie is already on the offensive, reminding him that he was the one who left the door open. She dangles the bank book in front of his face and demands to know what all this hidden money is actually for. Jin Young realizes there is no point in making up a story and sighs, admitting that he is saving every cent so he can finally move out. Sophie is genuinely stung by the news and tries to hide it behind an angry lecture. She claims she was touched because she thought the money was for a thank you gift for the family, and she accuses him of being a secretive and ungrateful houseguest. Jin Young has had enough of being treated like a burden and demands that she return his property at once. When she refuses and claims she cannot trust him anymore, his patience finally snaps. In a sudden surge of frustration, he grabs her and pins her, telling her in a low voice that he is done with her games. The sudden intensity catches them both off guard, and the room falls into a heavy silence. Realizing he has let his temper get the best of him, Jin Young quickly lets go and storms out, slamming the door behind him. He immediately regrets losing his cool, fearing that he has only made his situation in the house much worse. Meanwhile, Sophie stays perfectly still on the bed, her heart hammering against her ribs as she looks at the marks on her wrist. She realizes with a flush of heat that Jin Young is not a little kid anymore, and that his hands are much stronger and rougher than she ever realized. She thinks back to high school when he would walk her home to keep her safe, and she finds herself overwhelmed by a confusing mix of anger and sudden racing attraction. Standing outside Sophie's door, Jin Young's the weight of his earlier outburst and decides he needs to offer a sincere apology. He knocks gently, but when silence greets him from the other side, he assumes she must be too angry to even speak to him. He groans inwardly, figuring he should just give her some space to cool down before he makes things any worse. As he turns to trudge back to his own room, Sophie suddenly finds her voice and frantically shouts for him to stop right where he is. Jin Young pauses in confusion, wondering if he is about to get another lecture, but Sophie takes a deep breath and says she is finally ready to listen to whatever he has to say. Jin Young leans against the doorframe and begins to pour his heart out, racking his brain for every kind thing she has ever done for him. He mentions how grateful he felt back in high school when she insisted on walking him home, and how he never forgot the times she treated him to a warm meal or shared her umbrella on a rainy day. Inside the room, Sophie is a blushing mess, her heart racing as she realizes that he actually remembered all those small gestures from years ago. She sits on her bed, completely overwhelmed by the sound of his voice, and finding herself wanting the moment to last forever. Jin Young continues his list of gratitude, recalling how she stayed by his side and nursed him through a terrible bout of the flu when he had no one else to turn to. The emotional intensity of the conversation becomes too much for Sophie, and she lets out a series of shaky, heavy breaths that Jin Young can hear through the thin wood of the door. He instantly panics, worrying that his earlier rough handling might have actually caused her some sussy pain. He tries to force the door open to check on her, but Sophie slams her weight against it, desperately claiming she is just having a minor mishap. Relieved that she isn't actually injured, Jin Young offers a quiet farewell and decides to leave her to rest, feeling a sense of relief that the tension between them seems to have finally snapped. Sophie slumps against the door as she hears his footsteps fade away, her mind spinning with a sudden and intense realization. She looks at the marks on her wrist and accepts that she can no longer view him as just a little kid, especially after the way her body reacted to his sudden display of strength. To clear her head and cool her burning face, she decides to head downstairs for a glass of water, only to be interrupted by the sound of the front door clicking open. Her mother and Sarah have returned from their shopping trip at the mall, carrying bags of takeout for a family dinner. The sight of Jin Young's shoes at the entrance sends a fresh jolt of anxiety through Sophie, as she is nowhere near ready to look him in the eye after her secret reaction. When Mrs. Yu asks if the young man is home, Sophie stammers out a lie, suggesting he might be resting in his room because he isn't feeling well. She feels a deep sense of guilt for hiding her true feelings and decides that a long, hot shower is the only way to wash away her confusion. Under the steaming water, she reflects on how crazy she must be to have such thoughts about someone she grew up with, even going as far as drawing a little portrait of him in the mist on the glass. Once she is finished, Sophie heads back down the hallway, hoping that a bit of time has returned her world to normal. However, she notices that Jin Young's door is once again slightly ajar, and her curiosity gets the better of her as she stops to peek inside. Her heart stops when she sees her mother, Mrs. Yu, sitting on the edge of Jin Young's bed while he is fast asleep. Sophie watches in absolute paralyzed shock as her cold and distant mother leans down and does something very sussy. In that single silent moment, Sophie realizes that she isn't the only one in the house who has been hiding a very big secret. Inside the quiet bedroom, Mrs. Yu sits on the edge of the bed and gently strokes the sleeping young man's forehead, feeling relieved that he is not actually running a fever. She looks down at him with a soft and pensive expression, thinking about how hard he works to support himself even while he is still a student. As Jin Young shifts slightly in his sleep, she finds herself leaning, her heart racing, as she gazes at his peaceful face. In a silent moment, she leans down and does something sussy with him, but she immediately pulls back with a look of deep regret. She sits at his desk for a moment, shaking her head and realizing that she can no longer look at him as just the child she was asked to raise. She feels a profound sense of guilt for harboring such feelings for someone who grew up under her roof, and quietly slips out of the room to hide her blushing face. Watching from the shadows of the hallway, Sophie is frozen in a state of absolute disbelief at what she has just witnessed. She tries to rationalize the scene in her head, telling herself that it was probably just a quick peck on the cheek or some form of hidden motherly affection. She knows her mother is famous for being cold and distant, having stopped showing any warmth to her own daughters years ago, so the idea of her being this tender with Jin Young seems impossible. She stands in the bathroom, twirling her hair and wondering if her mother could truly be in love with the young man after nearly a decade of living together. The more she thinks about it, the more her head spins, and she decides that she simply cannot deal with this much drama before her morning coffee. The next morning, the house finally falls silent, and Sarah creeps out of her room with a mischievous glint in her eye, thrilled to finally have the place all to herself. She has been waiting for everyone to leave for work, describing the wait as a form of slow torture that she is finally free from. She lets herself into Jin Young's room and begins rummaging through his things with a playful giggle before throwing herself onto his unmade bed. She spends the next several minutes rolling around on the mattress and burying her face in his pillow, breathing in his scent and looking like she is having the time of her life. She is so lost in her own secret celebration that she completely fails to notice the door opening behind her. Sophie stands in the doorway, staring at her younger sister's bizarre behavior with a look of pure exhaustion, realizing that her family has officially reached a level of chaos that she never thought possible. Sophie retreats to the quiet sanctuary of a bathroom stall to process the absolute lunacy currently unfolding under her roof. Between catching her mother playing a secret game of Sleeping Beauty with Jin Young and witnessing her sister's bizarre bedroom antics, she concludes that sanity has officially moved out of the house. She becomes genuinely concerned that if she doesn't intervene soon, her mother and sister might actually make a move on him. Her greatest fear is that Jin Young might realize how strange the women in his life truly are and decide to vanish into thin air to escape the chaos. She resolves to take matters into her own hands and find a way to fix the situation before things spiral further out of control. This tension had been brewing for quite a while, beginning a year ago when Mrs. Yu first took over the company. With profits sliding and her employees whispering that she wasn't up to the task, her stress levels were already at a breaking point. It was during this period of professional crisis that a young Jin Young had approached her to announce he found a part-time job to pay for his keep. Already pushed to the edge, she had completely snapped at him, shouting that she never asked for his money and reminding him with unnecessary cruelty that he wasn't even part of the family. She had felt a wave of immediate regret as the words left her mouth, realizing she had just pushed away the one person she truly cared about. Back in the present, Sophie decides that the only way to save Jin Young is to literally remove him from the house. She figures that separating him from her competitive mother and sister is the only way to restore some semblance of order to their lives. While Jin Young is in his room trying to focus on his studies, he feels a sudden and ominous chill, which usually signals the arrival of a Sophie-related disaster. Right on cue, she bursts his door and begins a high-intensity interrogation regarding the current state of his bank account. Jin Young tries to explain that his savings are exactly what she saw before, but Sophie isn't interested in a polite conversation. She produces a thick envelope of cash and insists he add it to his moving fund immediately. When he tries to decline the offer, she turns the encounter into a mandatory gift-giving session, ordering him to take the money before she gets genuinely angry. She leaves him standing there in a state of total bewilderment, making him wonder if she might be suffering from some sort of terminal illness, since people often act very strange when they think their time is almost up. The following day, Sophie continues her mission by hovering over Jin Young and showing him various apartment listings she found on her phone. Jin Young is touched by the effort, but quickly realizes that every single place she is excited about looks like a blatant internet scam or a total dump. When he tries to gently point out that these listings are almost certainly fake, she takes it as a personal insult and starts venting her frustration on him. Jin Young is left to ponder what has gotten into her lately, as her behavior seems to be getting more concerning by the hour. By evening, Sophie has retreated to a local restaurant to drown her sorrows in several bottles of green bottled courage. She is devastated that her plan to be helpful backfired so spectacularly, having drained her own bank account only to provide him with a list of non-existent apartments. In her drunken state, she briefly considers if she should just stop trying to be clever and use her natural charms to win him over instead. She quickly brings herself back to earth, acknowledging that he likely views her as a common bully and probably wants to spend as much time away from her as possible. Just as Jin Young is finishing another long shift at the cafe, he spots a very familiar and very wobbly figure leaning against a wall down the street. He realizes he cannot just ignore her when she is clearly struggling to walk in a straight line, and catches her just as she begins to lose her balance. He tries to ask why she decided to get so completely hammered on a weeknight, but she is far too gone for a logical explanation. She points toward a nearby place and insists they need to go inside to rest for a while, causing Jin Young to turn a very bright shade of red. As he stammers about the sussiness of the suggestion, a smirking Sophie reminds him that there is absolutely nothing to worry about since they are practically family. Jin Young finds himself standing at the entrance of a local place, wondering how his life led to this specific moment of exhaustion. He dutifully guides a very intoxicated Sophie into the room, feeling like a weary soldier carrying a ticking time bomb. As soon as they enter, Sophie essentially surrenders to gravity and collapses face first onto the bed. Jin Young breathes a sigh of relief, promising her that they will leave the very second she feels human again. To help the process along, he heads to the side table to fetch some water, hoping a little hydration will fix the situation. He carefully pulls her into a sitting position and offers the bottle, but Sophie's coordination has clearly stayed behind at the restaurant. She manages to pour more water down her front than into her mouth, turning her dress into a damp mess in a matter of seconds. Jin Young panics and rushes to find tissues, only to spin around and find Sophie casually starting to dry her wet clothes. He experiences a near catastrophic level of embarrassment and quickly turns his back, shielding his eyes like his life depends on it. He begins a stern lecture on the importance of propriety and personal boundaries, while Sophie simply ignores him and proceeds to make herself comfortable. While the steam fills the bathroom, Sophie's mind is far from simple hygiene. She hums happily to herself, feeling quite proud that her plan to lure him into a place actually worked without him running for the hills. She finds his flustered reaction incredibly charming and assumes his embarrassment is proof that he is secretly interested. She briefly considers the technicalities of the situation, realizing she has no idea what she is doing, but remains convinced that he will take the lead if she provides enough motivation. She even pauses to worry about the logistics of safety, wondering if there are any supplies nearby or if she should have planned ahead. Ultimately, she decides her heart is beating too fast to give up now and prepares for her big entrance. Outside in the main room, Jin Young is sitting at the table with his head in his hands, praying that things will not get any weirder than they already are. His prayers go unanswered as Sophie walks out of the bathroom wearing nothing but a loosely tied robe. He immediately returns to his favorite hobby of staring at the floor and covering his face, begging her to at least put the robe on properly. He even offers to go out and buy her a shirt just to give himself a reason to escape the room. Sophie, however, has no intention of letting him leave, and sneaks up behind him for a surprise hug. Jin-young freezes as he feels her arms wrap around him, his mind completely short-circuiting from the sudden sussy contact. He stammers about how it really isn't good for her to catch a cold, but Sophie simply tells him she doesn't need a shirt and that he should just stay put. Driven to the brink of a total breakdown, Jin-young decides it is time for another noble lecture. He tries to explain that he is only saying these things because he is worried about her safety. He warns her that other men might misinterpret her unguarded behavior and that she needs to be more careful in the future. He even attempts to hand her his jacket as a final act of chivalry, reminding her that beneath his composed exterior, he is still a man with his own feelings. Sophie remains silent for a long moment, her heart thumping loudly as she absorbs his words. Just as Jin-young begins to wonder if he has finally gotten through to her, Sophie suddenly reaches out and firmly grabs him and starts a cardio session. The morning sun finds Jin-young in a state of absolute defeat as he kneels on the floor of the room, while offering every apology he can think of for what happened during the night. He is convinced he must have gone mad and completely surrendered his self-control, which is exactly the narrative Sophie wants him to believe in this moment. Even though she was the one who lured him there and set the stage, she uses her intimidating presence to make him feel like he committed a terrible crime. She leans back on the bed with a theatrical sigh and asks him if he truly believes a simple apology is enough after everything they did last night. She continues her dramatic performance by complaining about how sore her arms are, reminding him that he refused to let her go even when she asked him to stop. Jin-young can only stammer in response, his face turning a deep shade of red as he realizes she sounds genuinely furious with his behavior. Sophie watches his reaction with a hidden sense of triumph, realizing she has him exactly where she wants him. She tells him that if he is truly sorry for his actions, he needs to prove it by promising to do it with her again whenever she asks in the future. This unexpected demand sends Jin-young into a tailspin of confusion as he wonders if her morals are far looser than he ever imagined. He tries to rationalize the situation by thinking back to how she claimed he was a safe partner, but he eventually decides it is easier to just agree for now rather than prolong the awkwardness. By the time they finally make it out onto the street, the reality of their long night has clearly set in for both of them. Sophie stretches her stiff limbs and complains loudly that her back is absolutely killing her, which prompts another wave of guilt and frantic apologies from a very tired Jin-young. Sophie is not about to let him wallow in silence and delivers a sharp smack to his back to snap him out of his gloomy mood. She claims she does not want his dark energy rubbing off on her, but Jin-young is far more concerned about the glowing screen of his phone. He finds a missed call and an unread message from Mrs. Yu, making him realize that his absence from the house has not gone unnoticed. He stares at the notification with a growing sense of dread, wondering if he should be worried about the reception waiting for him back at the mansion. When they finally reach the front door, Jin-young tries to move with the stealth of a shadow, hoping that Mrs. Yu has already left for her office for the day. His hope is shattered the moment he peeks inside and finds the lady of the house standing right there in the entryway, looking like she has not slept a single minute. She stands with her arms crossed and a look of pure exhaustion on her face, demanding an immediate explanation for why they stayed out all night together without a single word of warning. Both Jin-young and Sophie freeze in place, realizing that their secret outing has led them straight into a very uncomfortable family interrogation. Mrs. Yu stands in the hallway sounding genuinely furious, as she wonders why it is so difficult for two adults to simply call home when they plan on staying out all night. She expresses her deep disappointment that they would make others worry so much and wonders if Jin-young is behaving this way because she recently told him to come home earlier. Jin-young stands there in a cold sweat, realizing that she has never scolded him like this before, and finds himself completely unable to provide a believable answer. Seeing him struggle, Sophie decides to take control of the situation by claiming she forced Jin-young to go drinking with her because she did not want to be alone. She tells her mother that they both ended up so intoxicated that calling home was the last thing on their minds. Yu remains skeptical as she frowns and wonders when the two of them became close enough to spend the night drinking together. Sophie casually reminds her mother that living under the same roof for a decade makes such a hangout perfectly normal, but Jin-young can tell by her mother's long stare that the story is not quite working. Eventually, Mrs. Yu lets them go, and Jinyoung retreats toward his room with a massive sigh of relief while Sophie mocks his pathetic attempts at lying. Once he is alone, Jinyoung leans against the door and realizes with a blush that he actually spent the night with Sophie, and that the reality of their secret is starting to sink in. He worries about what might happen if the lady of the house ever discovers the truth, but finds himself strangely looking forward to the next time Sophie decides to call on him. Several days pass without a single word from Sophie, and Jinyoung begins to wonder if she has simply forgotten about their agreement or if he should be the one to bring it up first. He decides that initiating the conversation might be too awkward, since the deal was for her to choose the time and place. While he is lost in these thoughts, Sophie suddenly appears and teases him for being so distracted that he did not even hear her calling his name. He tries to bring up their previous arrangement, but stops abruptly when he realizes Mrs. Yu is sitting nearby in the living room. Terrified of being overheard, Jinyoung panics and shouts a clumsy excuse about schoolwork before dashing away and leaving Sophie standing there in total confusion. Back in her room, Sophie grows more frustrated as she reflects on how many days have passed since their night at the place, and concludes that he must be avoiding her on purpose. She decides that the only way to get his attention is to take bold action, and begins rummaging through her closet for something special to wear. She eventually finds a set of daring black lace cardio cloth she bought a long time ago, and decides that today is the perfect day to see if her plan will work. As she admires her reflection in the mirror, Sophie wonders if this new look will finally get the reaction she wants from Jinyoung, even though she feels a bit ridiculous for trying so hard. Suddenly, there is a knock at the door, and hearing Jinyoung ask for a minute of her time, she reflexively tells him to come inside without thinking about her current state. Jinyoung pushes the door open and freezes in his tracks as he is greeted by the sight of Sophie in her most sussy cardio outfit yet. Sophie realizes her massive mistake a second too late and can only stand there in a state of absolute mortification as she tries to cover herself from his shocked expression. Sophie and Jinyoung find themselves trapped in a frozen moment of absolute awkwardness as she desperately tries to think of a logical explanation for her outfit before he labels her a total eccentric. Jinyoung stands by the door looking like his brain has completely short-circuited, while Sophie realizes that a single wrong word could make her look like a complete pervert in his eyes. Rather than making a move, Jinyoung suddenly lunges forward and grabs her by the shoulders to dump her onto the mattress so he can bury her under a thick blanket. He looks like he is on the verge of a total meltdown as he gasps for air and lectures her about the importance of wearing proper clothes even when she is alone in her own room. Sophie is not about to let him win the argument and springs back up with a defensive scowl, reminding him that her choice of attire is none of his business, before demanding to know why he bothered her in the first place. Jinyoung struggles to find his voice and stammers through an explanation about how he saw Mrs. Yu leave the house on urgent business and decided this was finally the best time to talk about their secret agreement. He admits that his mind went totally blank because he was taken aback by the view, but he still tries to act practical by rambling about the need to coordinate their schedules and make preparations in advance. Sophie watches his nervous rambling with a growing smirk, noting that his extreme level of distraction makes it very easy to read him like an open book. She realizes that despite his attempt to stay distant for the past few days, he has clearly been thinking about their secret room encounter a lot more than he is willing to admit. Jinyoung tries to claim that he was only avoiding her to keep Mrs. Yu from becoming suspicious, but Sophie leans in and teases him by pointing out that coming to her room the moment the coast is clear sends a very specific message. She decides to push her luck even further by asking if he wants to settle their deal right now, causing Jinyoung to panic about the possibility of Sarah hearing them from the room next door. Sophie casually dismisses his fears by suggesting that her sister is likely fast asleep or lost in her own world with her headphones on, which would allow them to stay perfectly unnoticed if they simply keep the volume down. She puts the final decision entirely in his hands and tells him that she is willing to follow through if he is brave enough to make the call. Jinyoung finds himself caught in an intense internal battle as he weighs the risk of being caught against the temptation of the moment, eventually realizing that being quiet might actually work in their favor. Just as Sophie begins to sigh and offer him an easy way out, Jin Young finds a sudden surge of resolve and grabs her once more to prove that he is not as hesitant as he seems. Sophie starts poking Jin Young's cheek with a mischievous grin, but her playful mood quickly shifts into a flurry of comedic punches as she accuses him of acting with a total lack of restraint. Jin Young can only shield himself while reminding her that she was the one encouraging him to keep going during their time together. The atmosphere remains thick with embarrassment as Jin Young catches a glimpse of her very unique choice in cloths, prompting Sophie to hurl a pillow at his face to silence his wandering thoughts. She eventually orders him to tidy up the room while she heads for the bathroom, even teasing him with a ridiculous invitation to join her that he immediately rejects by pushing her toward the door. As she laughs off his flustered reaction, Jin Young realizes he is finally growing accustomed to her chaotic and unpredictable sense of humor. Back in the quiet safety of his own room, Jin Young is just beginning to process the day's exhaustion when a sudden knock at the door ruins his plans for an early bedtime. He is stunned to find Sarah standing there with a look of pure judgment, and his heart sinks the moment he realizes she knows exactly what happened with Sophie. She reveals that she heard every bit of their loud commotion through the thin walls, making Jin Young wonder how they could have been so incredibly careless. Sarah's temper flares as she labels him an ungrateful houseguest and expresses her absolute disgust with his behavior, causing Jin Young to experience a level of panic he has never felt before. Realizing that his secret is completely out, Jin Young takes the noble route and offers a sincere apology, while taking full responsibility for the day's events. He begs her not to be angry with Sophie and suggests that she should direct all her frustration toward him instead, since he feels like a burden in their home. His humble display seems to strike a chord with Sarah, who finds it difficult to maintain her intense rage in the face of such genuine regret. However, she is not ready to let him off the hook entirely, and decides that her silence comes with a very specific price. She whispers a secret demand into his ear, forcing Jin Young to agree to a bargain to keep her from telling their mother the truth. The scene shifts to a busy city street, where a very well-dressed Jin Young waits nervously outside a karaoke bar for his mysterious appointment. He begins to worry that Sarah might be struggling to find the location, since she rarely leaves the house, but his thoughts are interrupted by a sharp whack to his back. He turns to find a completely transformed Sarah standing before him, dressed in a striking and dark alternative outfit that is a far cry from her usual pajamas. She reminds him that he is there as promised and asserts her newfound authority, informing him that for the rest of the day, he must do absolutely everything she wants. Sarah lies across her bed in a state of total distraction as she replays the secret bargain she made with Jin Young. She had whispered into his ear that on his next day off from classes, he would have to spend the entire day doing exactly what she wanted. Her imagination quickly takes flight as she envisions a series of perfect date activities, ranging from feeding each other at a cozy restaurant to walking down the street with their arms locked together. She even pictures them sharing drinks at a sophisticated bar before her thoughts take a much more adventurous turn and leave her a blushing mess on her pillow. She eventually forces herself to sit up and tries to make sense of why Jin Young would ever get involved with someone as loud and aggressive as Sophie. She wonders if being the only man in a house full of women has simply left him feeling a bit overwhelmed by his own surroundings. If he is truly looking for a way to let off some steam, she realizes with a jolt of excitement that she might actually have a real chance to get close to him. When the day of their meeting finally arrives, Sarah finds herself struggling to maintain her composure despite her striking new outfit. Jin Young greets her warmly and asks where she would like to go first, but her internal list of ideas has been completely replaced by a much more urgent set of thoughts. She is so flustered that she cannot even remember the proper order of a normal date, and her brain keeps jumping straight to the most scandalous conclusions. Desperate to hide her confusion, she tells him to stop asking questions and simply follow her lead as they start walking. Her subconscious must be working overtime because her feet lead them directly to the front entrance of a local place. Jin Young stops in his tracks and wonders why she would choose such a suggestive location for their first stop of the day. Sarah is internally mortified and curses her own mind for being so incredibly transparent and skipping over all the preamble. She tries to stammer out a frantic excuse to save her reputation, but she finds herself completely unable to find the right words to explain her behavior. In his usual noble fashion, Jin Young completely misinterprets her distress and assumes she is just a young boy who is naturally curious about things she has never experienced. He offers a gentle head pat and apologizes for not being more calm when he first realized how she felt. He reminds her that they have lived under the same roof for a decade and that she should not feel embarrassed about making a simple mistake. This act of kindness only makes Sarah's heart beat faster as she realizes she is done hiding her true feelings. She grips his sleeve and admits that her curiosity has been killing her ever since she found out about his secret with Sophie. Since she rarely leaves the house and has no one else she can turn to, she looks him in the eye and asks him to follow through with her right now. Jin Young stands in the middle of the street, feeling like his heart might actually jump out of his chest because Sarah just made a request that he never saw coming. He is absolutely reeling from the realization that she wants to share the same level of cardio training that he recently experienced with Sophie, and he struggles to find a response that does not make the situation even more awkward. He thinks back to nearly a decade ago, when Sarah was just a grumpy teenager going through puberty, and he was the awkward stranger suddenly living in her house. He always tolerated her hostility and her frequent angry outbursts because he understood how difficult it must have been for her to share her home with an outsider. Even though he knows she is likely feeling a bit desperate for attention, he finds himself stuck in a massive moral dilemma regarding their complicated relationship. They are technically family now, and he wonders how he could possibly look Mr. and Mrs. Yu in the eye if he ends up being involved with both of their daughters. He tries to play the sibling card to talk her out of the idea, but Sarah is not having any of it, and immediately brings up his secret with Sophie again as a counterpoint. She starts to worry that he might view her as just a child with a less developed figure, which only adds to her growing frustration and insecurity. When she threatens to take her curiosity to a random dating app, Jin Young experiences a fresh wave of protective panic that overrides his better judgment. He knows he cannot let her do something so potentially dangerous, but he still feels like following through with her request is fundamentally wrong. Eventually, his protective instincts win out, and he decides that being the one she turns to is better than her finding a stranger. Sarah is stunned when he finally agrees and leads the way toward the building, but the awkwardness only increases when Jin Young mentions the need for proper safety measures. It turns out Sarah was much more prepared than he expected, as she produces a small stash of supplies she had been carrying in her bag just in case. As the elevator climbs, Sarah secretly celebrates the fact that her plan is actually working and hopes this experience will bring them much closer together. Jin Young continues to question his own sanity for being in this situation in the middle of a perfectly normal day while feeling the weight of the responsibility on his shoulders. He notices her fidgeting and wonders if she is having second thoughts, but Sarah manages to find enough courage to confirm she is ready to move forward. Once the door clicks shut, Sarah becomes as stiff as a board and looks like she is frozen in place from the sheer weight of her nerves. Jin Young assumes her anxiety comes from the fact that this is her very first time in such a setting, and he decides he needs to step up as the more experienced person in the room. He realizes it must have taken a massive amount of courage for her to ask someone she supposedly hates for such a favor. He gently takes hold of her shoulders to help her relax and promises to be as patient and kind as possible while reminding her that she can stop the encounter at any time. Sarah can only offer a quiet nod of agreement as she feels the warmth of his hand and prepares herself for the next step in their strange new bargain. Sarah wastes no time rushing into the bathroom to wash up, while a dazed Jin Young sits on the edge of the room's bed, wondering if he has just survived a dream or a disaster. He reflects on the fact that Sarah has been kinder to him today than she has been in nearly a decade, and he wonders if this means they have finally managed to bridge the gap between them. Inside the bathroom, Sarah is a blushing mess as she dries her hair while hoping that their shared experience has truly brought them closer together and made her plan a success. The following day brings a fresh wave of confusion for Jin Young the moment he steps through the front door of the mansion. He is immediately startled by the lady of the house, who is waiting for him in the entryway while wearing a very distracting set of dark cardio cloths. Jin Young is paralyzed by her intense glare and wonders if he has done something to offend her once again. Mrs. Yu orders him to stop right where he is and insists that they need to have a serious conversation in the privacy of the master bedroom. Jin Young finds himself sitting awkwardly on a wooden chair while Mrs. Yu lounges on her bed in her sussy attire, and he wonders why they could not have spoken in the kitchen or the living room instead. She explains that it is far too late to risk disturbing the girls, which Jin Young admits is a practical point, even if the setting makes him feel incredibly out of place. She begins to interrogate him about his final year of college and asks if he has been able to search for a career while juggling his part-time shifts at the cafe. Jin-young feels a massive wave of relief that her concerns have nothing to do with his recent secret activities, and he realizes he was getting nervous for no reason at all. However, the atmosphere shifts the moment Jin-young mentions that he plans on moving out as soon as he finishes his degree. Mrs. Yu experiences a visible jolt of panic and practically lunges toward him to demand an explanation for his sudden desire to leave. She points out that Sophie still lives at home despite having a stable job and insists that there is absolutely no reason for him to move out just because he finds employment. She eventually dismisses him, but her sudden and intense interest in his future leaves Jin-young feeling completely bewildered as he beats a hasty retreat to the safety of the hallway. Back in the master bedroom, the lady of the house loses all of her composed dignity and begins rolling around on the mattress in a fit of pure frustration. She is absolutely determined to keep him in the house and wonders if his desire to leave is a direct result of her treating him so coldly for so many years. She realizes she needs to find a way to be more genial without making the shift in her attitude seem too suspicious. But the mere thought of her own behavior sends her into another blushing frenzy. She eventually buries her face in her pillow and decides that for the sake of the company and her own heart, she simply will not allow him to walk away. Jin-young eventually makes it back to his own room, feeling like he has overexerted himself for one lifetime, and decides that an early bedtime is his only hope for survival. He is just beginning to drift off into a peaceful sleep when he feels a sudden bump on the mattress that causes him to bolt upright in total shock. He finds Sophie lounging beside him with her shirt and a sleepy smile on her face as she asks him if he had a pleasant rest. Jin-young can only stare in absolute silence as he realizes that the women of the house have officially decided that his bedroom is no longer a private sanctuary. Jin-young wakes up to the sound of rustling sheets and quickly realizes that the warm presence in his bed is not part of a dream. He finds Sophie lounging beside him in a state of mid-morning daze, looking remarkably comfortable for someone who has just crashed an uninvited sleepover. Before he can even process his confusion, she leans in and greets him with an affectionate stroke of the forehead and a playful nip on the cheek, leaving him wondering if he has accidentally walked into an alternate reality. He manages to sit up and tries to find a logical explanation for why she spent the night in his room. Sophie casually admits that after having a few drinks, she simply ran out of motivation while uninstalling cloths and decided to fall asleep right where she was. Jin-young finds himself in a state of extreme embarrassment and begs her to put on some proper clothes, but Sophie is more interested in teasing him about his very obvious sussy reaction to the situation. She notices his morning tension and offers to help him settle it, sending a wave of absolute panic through a very flustered Jin-young. Just as the situation reaches its most awkward peak, the door swings open to reveal Mrs. Yu standing in the entrance. She is wearing a very daring set of cardio cloth herself, and for a long moment, the three of them can only stare at each other in a state of mutual, paralyzed shock. Jin-young immediately tries to salvage the situation by claiming that Sophie just had too much to drink and fell asleep by accident, insisting that nothing sussy took place before they were interrupted. Mrs. Yu settles into a chair and begins a stern lecture on the importance of boundaries, reminding them that they are both big people who need to consider the consequences of their actions. She expresses her deep concern about what might have happened if things had gone too far, but her intense focus on the matter starts to make Sophie suspicious. As she watches her mother go on and on, Sophie begins to suspect that this lecture is actually fueled by a secret sense of jealousy. To test the waters, Sophie decides to state some very specific facts. She points out that they aren't actually related by blood, and reminds everyone that Jin-young was never formally adopted into the family. She clings tightly to his arm and asserts that there really shouldn't be any problem even if something did happen between them. This bold move leaves the lady of the house looking completely stunned and unable to find a comeback. Mrs. Yu eventually retreats from the room, offering a final shaky warning for them to be more careful in the future. While Sophie giggles and calls Jin-young a wimp for his nervous behavior, the lady of the house returns to her own room to process her spinning thoughts. She feels a strange, throbbing ache in her chest and struggles to understand why the sight of the two of them together causes her so much distress. She tries to convince herself that being jealous of her own daughter is an absolute absurdity, but her heart refuses to listen to reason. Suddenly, she experiences a jolt of realization as she reflects on Sophie's earlier words. If the lack of a blood relation makes a relationship acceptable for her daughter, she realizes with a blush that the exact same logic applies to her own hidden feelings. Jin Young starts his Sunday morning with a long yawn, only to find the lady of the house standing in the hallway looking like she is ready for a red carpet event. He is completely caught off guard by her elegant dress and finds himself wondering why she is so glammed up on a quiet morning at home. When he mentions that she looks dressed to impress, the usually composed woman becomes a flustered mess, quickly dismissing his observation and ordering him to go eat his breakfast. Back in her room, the lady of the house feels her heart thumping against her ribs as she struggles to process the effect of a simple compliment. She admits to herself that she put in the extra effort to look beautiful, but hearing him notice it immediately is almost more than her heart can handle. Meanwhile, Jin Young sits down to a surprisingly elaborate breakfast of pancakes and coffee, noting that their morning meals are usually far more basic. He enjoys the food under the watchful and satisfied gaze of Mrs. Yu, who seems to be thoroughly enjoying the quiet moment they share together. The peaceful atmosphere is shattered when a very thirsty Sophie trudges down the stairs and stops dead in her tracks at the sight of her mother. She immediately notes the full makeup, the jewelry, and the sophisticated dress, realizing that her mother has completely abandoned her usual casual Sunday attire. Not one to be left out, Sophie makes her presence known by playfully pouncing on Jin Young from behind, which earns her a stern lecture from her mother about the dangers of startling people while they are holding cutlery. Sophie decides she is suddenly hungry for breakfast even though she usually skips it, purely because she refuses to leave the two of them alone for another second. As they sit together in a thick atmosphere of silent competition, Sophie eventually retreats to her room to process how her previous plan backfired so spectacularly. She realizes that instead of backing off, her mother has officially joined the race, proving that they both share the exact same taste in men. Sophie reflects on the irony of a mother and daughter competing for the same heart and concludes that all the usual rules of the house are officially out the window. Determined to regain her lead, she decides the house is now far too dangerous for Jin Young and prepares to lure him away for a secret outing to earn some much-needed points. Her resolve turns to pure fury when she discovers his room is empty and realizes that both he and her mother have already vanished from the house together. As she stands in the hallway noticing that both of their shoes are gone, Sophie experiences a surge of intense frustration. She vows that she will not sit by and do nothing while someone else tries to take him, firmly deciding that Jin Young belongs to her and her alone. Jin Young finds himself buckled into the passenger seat as the lady of the house takes charge of the morning commute. He attempts to find a logical explanation for their mysterious road trip, but receives only a vague assurance that all will be revealed in due time. He realizes that she has adopted the same cryptic speaking style as her youngest daughter, which does absolutely nothing to settle his racing heart. His confusion turns into genuine alarm when the car pulls up in front of a towering luxury hotel. He wonders if he's about to receive an incredibly expensive farewell gift before he officially moves out of the mansion. He realizes that spending so much time around the chaotic women in his life has started to put some very strange ideas into his head. The lady of the house notices his panicked expression and quickly clarifies that the building is also home to an elite spa. She explains that she brought him here for some well-deserved rest to help him recover from his busy schedule of work and classes. While she tries to maintain her usual professional poise, her blushing face reveals exactly how much this secret outing means to her. The situation reaches a new level of awkwardness when they are led into a secret room containing 2 massage tables. Jin Young realizes they are expected to undergo the treatment side by side and finds himself in a fresh state of absolute mortification. He struggles to keep his composure as they change into their robes, while his companion seems perfectly comfortable with the sudden lack of personal space. Jin Young is left staring at the wall in a state of total paralysis as his companion sheds her robe and settles onto her table for the session. He realizes that he has no idea how he is supposed to relax in such a high-tension environment and drips with nervous sweat as he finally takes his place. The arrival of the professional therapists marks the beginning of what he expects to be the longest hour of his life. However, the skilled touch of the staff proves to be his undoing, And 5 minutes later, all of his anxieties have completely melted away. He enters a state of pure bliss and looks so peaceful that he begins to lose all sense of his surroundings. From the neighboring table, the lady of the house watches his relaxed face and finds him incredibly adorable now that he finally looks at ease. She spends the rest of the session wondering why she tried so hard to keep her distance from him for so many years. As the therapists conclude their work and leave them to enjoy the quiet aroma of the room, she decides that she will take him on secret outings much more often. She even begins to imagine a future where she provides him with personal massages after he returns home from a long day of work. Jin-young eventually falls into a deep sleep while sitting up, and the lady of the house takes the rare opportunity to admire him from a distance. She gently strokes his hair and admits to herself that she has finished hiding her true feelings behind a mask of cold indifference. She leans in and does a sussy activity, finally breaking the silence that has defined their relationship for nearly a decade. Jin-young bolts awake in a state of total system failure as his brain struggles to process the sudden result of her touch. He realizes with a massive blush that the lady of the house just did something sussy with him while apologizing for being so distant in the past. He is left sitting on the edge of the bed in a state of absolute existential crisis, wondering how much more his heart can possibly handle before the day is over. The car pulls up to the mansion, and the lady of the house suggests that Jin-young head inside first while she takes care of parking. Before he can make a clean getaway, she stops him for one more lingering moment, reaching out to gently stroke his hair. She notes that the massage oil hasn't quite settled yet and tells him to wait a while before heading for the shower, leaving Jin-young to gulp down his mounting confusion as she finally drives away toward the garage. The moment he steps through the front door, Jin-young is tackled by a very suspicious and very loud Sophie, who has been waiting in the shadows like a hungry predator. She is on an immediate mission for the truth and demands a full report on where he went with her mother and exactly what they were doing all afternoon. Jin-young tries his best to play it cool, but his face is practically glowing a bright shade of beet red as he insists that they didn't do anything special. Sophie isn't buying the act for a single second, noting his nervous sweating and the way he makes a desperate stumbling dash for the safety of his bedroom to escape the interrogation. Back in her own room, she is practically vibrating with rage as she replays his evasive behavior in her head. She starts to imagine the absolute worst-case scenario, convincing herself that her mother must have used her sophisticated charms to fully seduce him. She huffs with pure indignation, wondering how her mother could behave so sussily when Sophie was the one who liked him first. Driven by a surge of frantic energy, Sophie kicks open her mother's bedroom door and skips the small talk, accusing the lady of the house for doing cardio with their house guest.